The wedding planner called me and said, "Your family canceled your invitation, but don't worry, we'll keep the $65,000 deposit." My stomach dropped. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like and sharing it with the people you care about. It was late in the afternoon when the call came. I was at my kitchen counter sorting through a list of errands for the week, when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. A woman's polite voice introduced herself as the wedding planner for Jason and Hannah, my brother and his fiancée. She spoke as if she were reading from a script, calm and detached, as though what she was about to say didn't matter. Then she delivered the line that would stick in my head for days. "Your family canceled your invitation." At first I thought I'd misheard. I laughed nervously, asked her to repeat it. She didn't hesitate. "Your family informed us that your attendance is no longer needed, but the deposit of $65,000 remains secured with us." My grip on the phone tightened. I managed a choked "what?" before she repeated herself again, unbothered, like it was a routine update. I remember standing there, staring at the chipped edge of the counter, listening to her words echo in my head. My family canceled my invitation. Not a misunderstanding. Not a mistake. My family made that choice. Only weeks away from the wedding, I had already bought a dress, new shoes, a gift I'd been saving up for. I had cleared my schedule, taken time off work, and even helped Hannah with errands when she claimed she was too busy. I sat with her once, flipping through flower samples for centerpieces, trying to reassure her when she panicked about the wrong shade of ivory. I had smiled through it all because I wanted to support my brother. I thought I was part of this celebration, part of the family. Now I was being told I was cut out, like I never mattered, like I was disposable. The planner asked politely if I had any questions, her voice smooth, distant, professional. I couldn't find words. My chest felt heavy, my throat tight, the silence on my end stretching until she softly said, "Well, that's all I needed to update you on. Have a good day." And just like that, the call ended. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud, and stared at my phone as if it could give me answers. My brother. My own family. They didn't even have the decency to tell me themselves. Instead, they used a stranger, a hired planner, to deliver the message that I was no longer welcome. I didn't cry right then. I didn't scream. I just stood frozen, one hand still pressed against the counter, realizing everything I thought I knew about where I stood in my family had just been ripped away in a single phone call. My brother's name is Jason Carter. He's 31, the kind of man who walks into a room expecting everyone to notice him. Ambitious, smooth-talking, always chasing the next big opportunity. People admire him at first glance, but living with him taught me that his charm comes at a cost. He has never once paused to see the people he steps over. Then there's Hannah Mitchell, 30 years old, soon to become my sister-in-law. Hannah is polished in every way. She speaks like she's rehearsed every line, dresses as if she's headed to a magazine cover shoot, and carries herself like the world is supposed to bend around her. She grew up in a family that valued money and image above all else, and she fits right in with Jason. Together they are a pair made for flashing cameras, always smiling wide for the perfect photograph while hiding the cracks no one is supposed to see. My parents, Robert and Linda Carter, have always been obsessed with appearances too. They believe reputation is worth more than truth, and what neighbors whisper matters more than what their children actually feel. Growing up, it was clear who their favorite was. Jason could miss deadlines, skip responsibilities, or rack up debt, and they would still praise him for his potential. If I accomplished something, graduating, working hard, keeping steady, it was brushed aside as ordinary. That difference only grew sharper as we got older. Whenever I tried to share good news, they found a way to turn the conversation back to Jason. If he bought a new car, they celebrated it. If I paid off a loan or got a raise, they nodded politely and asked about Jason's latest project. I learned early on that in their eyes, I would never shine as bright as their golden sun. With Hannah stepping into the picture, the divide deepened. She quickly learned how to play into their obsession with status, showing off her designer clothes, her well-connected friends, her big ideas for the wedding. My parents were enchanted. I became background noise in my own family. The subtle exclusions started small. Group texts where I noticed gaps, plans being made without me, inside jokes I wasn't part of. Family dinners where conversations swirled around Jason and Hannah while I sat on the edge, my words dropping into silence. I tried to remind myself not to take it personally, But over time the message became clear. I was optional. When decisions about the wedding came up, my input was treated like an afterthought. I'd offer a suggestion and Hannah would nod, only to move on without considering it. Jason laughed it off as her being picky, but I could see the smirk behind her polite smile. She knew exactly what she was doing. Each moment on its own was small enough to dismiss, but together they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Slowly, without saying it out loud, my family was drawing a line, and I was standing on the outside of it. A few days later, the pieces started falling into place. I found out my parents had written a check for $65,000 to cover the deposit on Jason and Hannah's big celebration. The number alone made my head spin. It was more than I made in a year, more than they had ever offered me for anything. They handed it over like it was nothing, all to make sure Jason's wedding looked perfect from every angle. At first, I thought the decision to cut me out was a misunderstanding. Maybe the planner had mixed something up. But then I heard the truth. Jason and Hannah themselves had decided that I, along with Ryan and our kids, didn't belong on the guest list anymore. They framed it as Hannah wanting a drama-free day. That was the excuse. Drama-free. As if my existence alone caused chaos. I tried to wrap my head around it. We weren't troublemakers. Ryan and I kept to ourselves, raised our kids, worked hard. Our children had been looking forward to seeing their uncle get married. They had their outfits picked out, excited about dancing at the reception. None of that mattered. Hannah wanted control and Jason let her have it. My parents nodded along, agreeing like it was the most natural thing in the world. The part that cut the deepest was what came next. Instead of asking for the deposit back after uninviting us, Jason told the planner to keep it. Just keep the money. $65,000 locked in for a wedding we weren't even allowed to attend. It wasn't about the funds, it was the message. They were willing to throw that much away to erase me from the picture. I confronted my parents, my voice shaking with anger. You really think this is okay? You're fine with him cutting me out and tossing away money like that? I wanted them to defend me, to at least admit it was wrong. Instead, my mother pressed her lips together and said calmly, "It's Jason's special day. Don't make it about you." The words hit me harder than I expected. Don't make it about you. As if being excluded wasn't already personal. As if standing by while they erased me from my own brother's wedding was selfish. I felt the heat in my chest rising, but my father added, his voice steady and firm, "We don't want conflict. Just let Jason have this moment." I realized then that no amount of pleading would change their minds. Their loyalty was set, and it wasn't with me. My parents chose silence over fairness, appearances over family. They treated my pain as an inconvenience, something to be brushed aside so Jason could shine without shadows. That night, I sat awake replaying their words, the weight of that deposit sitting heavy in my thoughts. It wasn't just money. It was proof of where I stood in their eyes, outside looking in and completely unwanted. The more I thought about the deposit, the more old memories came rushing back. It wasn't the first time money had been handed to Jason without question. When he wanted to go to college out of state, my parents covered his tuition and living expenses. I stayed local, worked part-time jobs, and scraped together my own way through school. When he turned 21, they surprised him with a brand new car, shiny and waiting in the driveway. I bought my first used car with a loan that took years to pay off. Later, when he was ready to buy a house, they wrote another big check to help him with the down payment. For me, there was no offer, no cushion. Every step of my life was filled with lectures about responsibility, reminders not to expect help, criticism that I should plan better or aim higher. I carried that weight, but I kept going. I built what I had through long hours and constant sacrifice. Still, no matter what I achieved, it was never enough to be seen the way Jason was. All of those moments boiled inside me until I couldn't hold it anymore. One night, over dinner at my parents' table, I finally let it out. Jason wasn't there, and neither was Hannah. It was just me, Ryan, and my parents sitting across from us, plates of food going cold as the tension grew. I looked directly at them and asked, "So you'd rather pay $65,000 than have me and your grandkids at the wedding?" My voice was steady, but my hands clenched under the table. I needed them to answer honestly, to admit what their choice really meant. My mother set her fork down with deliberate calm. "This wedding is about Jason," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Not you. Don't make it about yourself." Ryan shifted beside me, ready to step in, but I couldn't look away from her. I turned to my father, hoping for a different response. He only shook his head slightly, his face unreadable. "It's his day," he said. "You don't need to be there if it causes problems." The room felt colder in that moment. My own parents had looked me in the eye and told me that I, and my children, weren't worth as much as Jason's picture-perfect wedding. They had chosen their golden son over the rest of us without hesitation. I didn't argue further. I couldn't. Something inside me shifted. The fight drained out, replaced by a heavy understanding. I wasn't just being left out of one event. I had been cut out of my family's story completely. They had shown me without a doubt that I was disposable to them. I sat there, staring at the food I could no longer taste, realizing that the people I once believed would stand by me no matter what had already made their choice. And it wasn't me. After that dinner, Ryan tried to calm me down. He told me it wasn't worth the fight, that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and protect your own peace. He wanted me to close the door and focus on our little family, to let Jason and my parents drown in their own choices. His voice was gentle, but I could hear the warning behind it. He knew I was already thinking of doing something else. I shook my head. Walking away wasn't enough. They had erased me and my children without a second thought, and I couldn't just let it pass. I didn't want to ruin the wedding day itself. That would have been too obvious, too easy for them to twist into me being bitter or jealous. No, I needed to do something quieter, something they couldn't ignore once it landed in their hands. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. That's when I remembered the loan. Years earlier, Jason had come to me with a story about needing help. He said he was strapped for cash, promised it was temporary, and asked if I could lend him $15,000. It wasn't pocket change for me. It was months of saving, but I gave it to him because he was my brother. He swore he'd pay me back in a year. He never did. At the time, my parents brushed it off as siblings helping siblings. When I brought it up again, Jason laughed and said he'd get around to it. He never did. That money disappeared into his endless cycle of grand ideas and reckless spending. And now, seeing my parents throw $65,000 at his wedding while I was left cut off, the memory of that loan burned in me like fire. So I started digging. I pulled out the old emails where Jason thanked me for the money. I found the text messages where he promised repayment dates. I collected bank statements showing the transfer. Piece by piece, I built a file no one could deny. As I worked, I realized this wasn't just about the $15,000. Over the years, Jason had leaned on me for favors, for quick cash, for cover stories when he couldn't keep up. There were patterns of him taking advantage, always with a grin and a promise he never kept. I gathered everything quietly, never letting on to anyone what I was doing. Ryan watched me with cautious eyes, worried I was going too far, but he didn't stop me. He knew this was the only way I could make peace with myself. Every document I saved, every message I printed felt like stacking bricks for something bigger. I didn't know exactly when I'd use it, but I knew the day would come. The wedding would happen, the smiles would be staged, and then when the timing was right, the truth would land like a stone dropped in calm water, sending ripples no one could stop. It didn't take long for the news to leak out. My parents might have thought they could quietly cut me away, but families have a way of sharing whispers. Cousins started asking why they hadn't seen my name on the guest list. An uncle called Ryan to check if we were traveling for the ceremony. Little by little, people learned the truth. We weren't invited at all. The reactions came quickly. Some relatives were shocked, asking if it was a mistake. Others were angry, their voices sharp as they asked how Jason could exclude his own sister. The more the word spread, the more uneasy Jason became. Hannah, however, didn't flinch. She had her explanation ready, smooth and polished like everything else about her. She told people I was unstable, that I stirred up drama, that it was safer to leave me out so their day wouldn't be ruined. I could almost hear her voice as she spun her version of events, carefully painting me as the problem while she stood tall as the bride who only wanted peace. It was cruel, but it worked with some people. I could feel eyes shifting, stories twisting, my name being reshaped into something ugly. One afternoon my phone rang and it was my Aunt Margaret. Her voice shook as she asked me if it was true. When I told her yes, there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she said, "You've always been there for this family. I don't understand how they could do this to you." He sounded more hurt than I did. Hearing the pain in her voice lit something inside me. If even she, who had always kept neutral, was shaken, then I knew the truth would matter when the time came. After I hung up, I turned to Ryan. He had been patient, letting me collect proof, watching me fight my way through the hurt. This time he didn't suggest walking away. He only asked, "Are you ready to go through with it?" I nodded. The plan was clear now. We weren't going to stop the wedding, not going to stand outside the venue and make a scene. That would give them exactly what they wanted. Evidence that I was the troublemaker. Instead, we would wait. Let them have their big day, their pictures, their applause. Let them believe they had won. And then when the lights dimmed and the smiles faded, the truth would come crashing down. We stayed quiet on the outside, but inside, every move was deliberate. The documents were safe, the timeline set. I didn't know exactly how the fallout would look, but I knew it was coming. And I knew deep down that no amount of polished lies from Hannah or blind loyalty from my parents could shield Jason forever. The cracks were already there. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to let them split wide open. The morning of the wedding came, but in our house it felt like any other Saturday. There was no rushing to get dressed, no excited chatter about heading to a celebration. Instead, silence hung over us like a heavy curtain. Ryan made breakfast, but no one touched much of it. The kids kept asking the same question, their voices small and confused. Why can't we go to Uncle Jason's wedding? I didn't know how to answer without breaking. I told them gently that we weren't invited, that it wasn't our place to be there. Their little faces crumpled, their eyes filling with tears. They had been looking forward to dancing, to wearing the new clothes hanging untouched in their closets. Watching them cry cut deeper than anything else. I had been hurt, yes, but they were innocent and they had been thrown aside too. Meanwhile, I knew what was happening across town. Jason and Hannah were surrounded by flowers, music, and smiling faces. Cameras clicked as they posed for perfect photographs, the kind my parents would later frame and hang on their walls. There would be speeches, champagne, applause. And in every picture, in every memory, there would be a space where we should have been. I sat on the couch, rage burning under my skin. For so long I had tried to earn my place in that family. I had worked harder, stayed quieter, pushed down the unfairness just to keep peace. But watching my children cry made everything clear. This wasn't my family anymore. They had chosen who mattered, and it wasn't us. Ryan placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and quiet. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew what came next. While the music played at Jason's reception, I sat at our dining table and opened the folder I had been building. One by one I laid out the emails, the bank records, the text. Every page told a piece of the story Jason had worked so hard to hide. I organized everything neatly, sliding each sheet into the packet with careful hands. There was no rush. The wedding day wasn't mine to ruin. Let them smile under the lights, let them bask in attention. I wanted the truth to come later, when the echoes of their celebration had faded. As the afternoon wore on, I could almost picture them posing for family portraits without me, my parents standing proudly at Jason's side. I imagined their laughter, their toasts, their perfect night. And with every image I felt the weight in my chest lighten just a little. Not because I was okay, but because I knew it wouldn't last for them. By the time the sun set, my packet was complete, sealed and ready. While they celebrated, I sat quietly in my own home, holding the evidence that would undo everything they thought they had built. A week passed and Jason and Hannah returned from their honeymoon. Photos of beaches and cocktails had already filtered through the family grapevine. My parents were glowing with pride, bragging about how wonderful the trip had been. It was all too perfect, too polished, as if the cracks I had seen didn't exist. But I was ready. On a quiet evening after the kids were in bed, I sat at the dining table with Ryan and sealed the envelopes. Each one contained a letter written in plain words, along with the documents I had collected. I didn't bother with flowery explanations. I laid out the facts. Jason had borrowed $15,000 from me, promised repayment, and never returned a cent. I attached proof, emails, texts, bank records. Then I included other details, the little favors, the debts he had piled onto others, the way he had leaned on family money for years while pretending to stand tall on his own. The letter was calm but sharp. I wrote, "If you had $65,000 to throw away on a wedding deposit, then you had $15,000 to pay me back. You chose not to. That says everything." I didn't add anger or insults. The evidence spoke for itself. I addressed one envelope to my parents. Another went to my aunt and uncle, the ones who had already questioned the decision to exclude me. A third was sent to Hannah's parents, who had always seemed proud of their daughter's match. I wanted them to see exactly what kind of man their daughter had married. At the post office my hands didn't shake. I slid the stack of envelopes across the counter and watched as the clerk stamped them one by one. Ryan stood beside me, quiet but solid. He didn't need to remind me to be sure. I was sure. More sure than I had ever been about anything. For the next few days I carried on as normal, but my thoughts stayed with those letters as they made their way into the hands of the people who needed to see them. I pictured my mother opening hers at the kitchen table, my father scanning the pages in silence. I imagined my aunt calling her husband over, reading the words out loud. I thought about Hannah's parents sitting in their living room, faces tightening as they flipped through the proof of Jason's lies. I didn't know what the reactions would be, but I knew one thing. They could never look at Jason the same way again. The golden image my parents had built around him would never be as shiny. The truth was out there now, impossible to deny or bury. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I hadn't screamed or begged or made a scene. I had simply told the truth and placed it where it belonged. Now it was their turn to deal with it. The responses came faster than I expected. The first call was from my mother. Her voice shook, not with sadness but with fury. "Why didn't you tell us about this sooner?" she demanded. I could hear my father in the background, his tone sharp, asking how Jason could have hidden so much. For the first time in my life, they weren't defending him. They were questioning him. I didn't argue or explain. I just said, "You wouldn't have listened," and let the silence stretch before ending the call. Soon after, word spread through the rest of the family. My aunt called, her voice filled with both shock and relief. "I knew something was off," she said. "I just didn't realize it was this bad." Other relatives followed, each one expressing disbelief, their voices heavy with disappointment directed not at me but at Jason. The tide had turned and it was rolling fast. Then came the most satisfying reaction of all. Hannah's parents reached out. They weren't yelling, but their words were sharp as knives. They said they were disgusted by Jason's history of debt and manipulation. They had invested so much pride into their daughter's marriage, and now they saw the cracks before the ink on the marriage license was even dry. They wanted to know how long he had been hiding things. Their polished world was suddenly stained, and it was Jason who had left the mark. Meanwhile, cousins who had once followed Jason's lead began distancing themselves. Invitations stopped, calls stopped, and the whispers changed direction. The family who once treated me as invisible now treated him like a problem they didn't want to be associated with. Jason must have felt the walls closing in because soon my phone lit up with his name. The first call, I let it ring. The second, I declined. The third, I watched in silence as the screen went dark again. He left a message, his voice tight, trying to sound calm but slipping into panic. "We need to talk. You've made a huge mistake." I didn't respond. Every part of me wanted to press play and scream back, to tell him how it felt to be erased, to be treated like nothing. But I didn't. Ignoring him was louder than any words I could have said. Days passed and the fallout only grew worse. My parents avoided public gatherings, embarrassed by the truth they could no longer hide. Hannah's polished smile began to falter as people whispered about the kind of man she had married. Jason, once the golden son, now stood exposed, stripped of the illusion he had carried for years. For once, everyone saw him clearly. Not the success story my parents had built up, not the charming face he showed at parties, but the man who used, lied, and took until there was nothing left. And this time there was no one left to protect him. In the weeks that followed, the air around me felt different. I knew my parents were no longer proud of me, not that they ever truly had been, but now the distance was sharp and final. They didn't forgive me for exposing Jason, though I hadn't lied about anything. They had invested years into the image of their perfect son, and I had torn that picture apart. Losing their approval hurt for a moment, but it didn't break me. Instead, I felt something else, relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their acceptance. I had chosen myself. Jason's world, however, began to unravel. His marriage, which had looked so flawless on the surface, quickly started showing cracks. Hannah was not blind to what had been revealed, and no amount of polished smiles could cover the anger behind closed doors. Money arguments began, whispers of debt resurfaced, and trust eroded. The very foundation of their life together was built on the lies I had laid bare, and now it was crumbling. I didn't watch from the sidelines with glee. It wasn't joy that filled me, it was clarity. Jason had written his own downfall. I had only handed out the receipts. My parents still clung to him, but their faces carried shame now. They couldn't parade him around as their shining example anymore. And while they looked smaller, quieter, I felt stronger. At home, life was steady. Ryan and I focused on our kids, on building a world where they knew they mattered without question. We had dinners filled with laughter, weekends at the park, evenings spent talking about plans for the future. It wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was real. I didn't have to compete for love in my own home. I didn't have to prove I was worth a place at the table. Here I already belonged. Every now and then I'd hear about Jason. Another argument with Hannah, another financial mess, another relative avoiding his calls. The man who once stood on a pedestal now stumbled in the shadows of his own choices. I didn't interfere. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work, and it was still unfolding piece by piece. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat outside with Ryan and thought about everything that had happened. I realized I had spent years trying to win a game I could never win. The approval I wanted from my parents was never going to come. But I no longer needed it. I had respect for myself, and that was something no one could take away. Sometimes the best revenge isn't ruining their big day. It's letting the truth ruin everything they built on lies. And as I looked at the life I was building with Ryan and our children, I knew I had already won. Do you think I was right to walk away from my family after everything, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.